Welcome, scholars, to our second session. It was great getting to know all of you in the first session. I know that some of you are experiencing tech issues and storms and Wi-Fi problems and all that, the joys of 2021, but we appreciate that you are back and you are here, and I think you're really going to enjoy this session. So session 2 is called The Leader and the Man. Scholars, so remember you are off camera for this session, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. If you'd like to ask a question, just request to ask a question and we can pull you up on screen. So now I want to introduce our panelists today. So first of all, one of our GE-Reagan Foundation Scholarship alumni, a 2018 scholar attending the College of Idaho, Mr. Josh Anderson, who will be helping me co-moderate. Welcome, Josh. Our next guest is our Chief Administrative Officer here at the Reagan Foundation, Ms. Joanne Drake, who is an alumnus of the Reagan administration, was the President's Chief of Staff during the final 10 years of his life.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Joanne, for joining us. Our next guest is one of our trustees, Michael Castine, who worked in the Reagan administration. Thank you for joining us, Michael. And finally, a last-minute replacement. Thank you, Carol, for agreeing to join us last minute. One of our other panelists had to opt out, but we are very excited to hear from you and to have you share some of your stories. So as I have it here, you volunteered to work on the Reagan for President campaign in 1980, moved to Washington, and were able to work in the administration. So Carol, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, so before we get started and hop into this, Josh, I was wondering if you could just tell our scholars what you've been up to since you were awarded the scholarship a few years ago.
Sure. Thanks, Tony. And first of all, I'd just like to say that it's lovely to see each of you again. And the Reagan Foundation holds a very special place for me, so I'm so glad to come back and contribute a little bit. But yeah, as Tony was saying, I'm currently a student at the College of Idaho, which is a small liberal arts college in southwestern Idaho, not too far away from where I live. But there I am an undergraduate student. I just finished up my junior year and will be going into my senior year next September when we get started again. I'm a major in a department we have called political economy, and that department essentially combines a number of foundational economic and political thinkers with the modern influence of economics into many of our political systems. But anyways, I'm currently in Washington, D.C. right now for a summer internship with a representative from my home district. And so if you hear a few voices in the background, I'm in the office right now. So yeah, it's a busy time, but quite an enjoyable thing. So anyways, Joanne, I seem to remember you telling us a number of stories at my scholarship retreat about some of your most memorable times during your time in the White House. Would you be able to share some of those stories with our 2021 scholars?
I'd be happy to. Thanks, Josh. Glad to know you're in Washington, D.C. It's a great city. I spent 10 years of my life there. I know there are others on this call that will probably support that. But I have to say, I was ready to get out of the weather of Washington, D.C. I don't know if you have begun the 210% humidity yet, but if you haven't, be prepared for that. I wanted to share with the scholars today, as I have in the past, just a little bit about the man. I think you can learn a lot about Ronald Reagan as president through so many, opportunities now online, through video, through his speeches, through documents here at the Reagan Library, through visiting the Reagan Library, which I hope all of you can do sometime very soon. And we look forward to having you here. I was privileged to work for him at the White House for 4 years in the Presidential Advance Office. And that was an office where we were very privileged. I know I was very blessed. We were able to travel out ahead of him to prepare for a presidential trip, which, as you can imagine, is quite extensive. And one of my favorite stories happened in June of 1987. We're going to have a photo in just a minute. I happen to know the exact date because it was my birthday. We were in Venice, Italy for the G7 summit. And we had a little bit of time. Yes, a girlfriend of mine had said, what do you want to do for your birthday? And I said, well, I'd kind of like to go out, sit outside and have a coffee for a few minutes. And so we did, as you see me sitting there across from my dear friend, Shelby, who actually was going to be on this call, but couldn't be. And all of a sudden, I hear over my shoulder the voice of the President of the United States singing happy birthday to me. And honestly, it was so embarrassing. I turned the shade of red that my jacket is right now, otherwise known as Nancy Reagan red, because I couldn't stand up. And it was, all I was thinking was, oh my gosh, the President of the United States is standing behind me. I'm seated, I can't stand up, and I don't know what to do. Well, he sang the entire song. And when he finally came to the end of it, I sort of shimmied out of my seat and stood up as quickly as I could, 24 shades of red, and said something stupid like, Mr. President, what are you doing here? Because you see, I had helped create his schedule for the day. So I knew that he was supposed to be in a boat on his way to a G7 summit meeting. And yet here he was singing to me on the patio on the Grand Canal. And he said something like, well, I heard it was your birthday and I thought I wanted to come and sing to you. So yes, I will remember that day for as long as I live. And, but for me, it just showed what a wonderful human being he was, to take a few minutes out of his schedule when someone came and asked and told him that it was my birthday. He loved surprises. He loved practical jokes. And this, for me, ended up being a little bit of both. And it just really showed a very humble side of him, a side that I know the rest of my panelists will concur with and have some wonderful stories too. So I look forward to seeing you all. I have other stories we'll get to perhaps later. But I don't know how Josh and Tony, you want to handle this, so I'll throw it back to you guys.
Excellent. I'll pull that down, and I know we'll come back and we got some other good ones. So the next question, I'm going to go to Michael this time. So Michael is an alumni of the Reagan administration. I know you have a lot of great stories and memories from your time working for the president. What memory really stands out for you as kind of representing what kind of leader President Reagan was?
Oh, he was amazing, and obviously we're all biased on this call, but he was also, as much as he was a great leader worldwide, as Joanne was saying, he looked out for the little guy, if you will. And so I worked in the scheduling office initially across from Joanne, and then he created a new office called the Office of Private Sector Initiatives, and it was getting the business community more involved with philanthropy and volunteerism and promoting public-private partnerships. So anything that kind of was unique fell on my desk. And one day, I think he was at an event in Kentucky, and a man stood up. His name was Bricker. I remember his last name. And he hands the president a resume and said, Mr. President, I'm looking for a job. So that resume ends up on my desk, and I had to go help. I told Mr. Bricker, I said, look, we can't give you a job, but we can introduce you to some people that might hire you if they feel you're qualified. So the press was all over this. And as you can imagine, it was sort of a 24-hour, did we find Mr. Bricker a job yet? And anyway, long story short, there happened to be an East Wing event coming up like 2 days later. So I had to figure out how to get Mr. Bricker hired. As it turned out, a number of people actually reached out, and I called some people we knew in Kentucky, and they got him a number of interviews. And and he eventually got a job, is the punchline. But for me, I get a call from David Gergen, who is the lead communications guy. And he said, the president and the vice president are in the Oval Office. They want to talk to you about Mr. Bricker before we go over to the East Wing reception. So I thought it would be like a dozen people standing around. It was just the three of us. And as Joanne can tell you, you walk into the Oval Office, and even if you've been there a number of times, I mean, your heart starts beating faster, and there's just a real electricity in the room. So here I am telling the President of the United States and the Vice President about Mr. Bricker and the potential jobs he had. And so the President turns to me and says, well, let's go over to the East Wing. So here I'm in the middle of the President and the Vice President walking down the colonnade by the Rose Garden. And I'm looking around and I said, how can there be no photographers here at this point in time? Because they all had already gone over to the East Wing. But anyway, that wasn't, I can tell you about, high level things with Gorbachev and such like that. But this one was all about, we've got to help Mr. Bricker. And why don't I stop there? But it was one that really stood out for me, special moment.
Did you find yourself wishing technology had sped up a little? You could have paused and taken a selfie as you were walking. That would have been
exactly. Yeah, the Motorola bone phone that we were using wouldn't do that then.
Yeah, the large brick. We called it a cell phone, but it literally, guys, it was about 14 inches long and about 6 inches wide. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, maybe a Polaroid selfie at that point, right? I think Polaroid.
Yeah, probably right, Tony.
Well, and then I want to throw a question to Carol. So, Carol, you had kind of a unique experience. So, Michael talked about being in the Oval Office and how intimidating that was. One of the great presidential retreats is Camp David, right? The president is kind of away from the limelight of Washington, D.C. What side of the president did you see during your trips out to Camp David?
Well, we did see a very personal side of him. I will go back to something that Michael said, though, about the Oval Office. My husband's office was right outside the Oval Office. He'd been in the advance office where Joanne was the first term, and then was his personal aide the second term. And the kids would come in, and they were young, but they would come in, and no intimidation of the Oval Office at all. They called President Reagan the boss, because he was their daddy's boss. And my son, probably at the age of 3, went running into the Oval Office and yelled, "Hey, Mr. Peanut Butter Head." And the president just burst out laughing. I mean, it was hysterical. Or he'd offer them jelly beans and they'd end up on the floor, and he'd be over there laughing and picking them up after him or whatever. I mean, he was just truly a kind, loving family man. And the same up at Camp David. He was outside all the time, riding horses. He let the kids go ride with the park police, take a little horseback ride when the horses came up for them. The kids would go deliver the secure briefing in the morning. I'll bring the kids with you. We always wanted my husband to be with the kids because he knew he was taking them away traveling so much. So they'd go running. They'd be having breakfast in bed at Camp David, and the kids would go running in and hop in and give him, his briefings and things, and it was just special time. They'd come for the radio address every Saturday to the main lodge, and gracious to any of the staff members up there who hadn't met him yet. He'd say hello, and he'd hang out, talk with people, tell stories for a while. It was really nice.
Excellent. Thank you, Carol. I think Josh has got the next question.
If I could just add a footnote to what Carol said. In the picture that Joanne showed, Jim Kuhn was responsible for making the president be on time for everything. And when he's singing to you, Jim is in the background looking like, what's he doing over there? I'm going to get him to a summit. And
yes, well, I think that Jim Kuhn had a lot to do with why Ronald Reagan was standing behind me.
I'm sure he did.
And not in a boat on the way to a meeting, because he was.
But that's because he knew what kind of man he was.
Right.
That's what he would want to be.
That is exactly
right.
It was
Joanne's birthday. He'd want to acknowledge it. He was just, he was that special. Jim tells a story about being, I think they were in Canada. I don't know, but they were off stage, and the president was going to be, brought on stage, and they started playing Pomp and Circumstance, is what the president always walks into. And he had to nudge him and say, "Sir, it's time to go." And he goes, "I still can't believe they're playing that for me." A humble guy.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those stories. I know I quite enjoy hearing them, and I'm sure everyone else does too. But my next question is for all three of you. If you could encapsulate President Reagan's best leadership qualities into 3 words, what were they, or what would they be, and why?
You want me to start? I'll jump in. Well, and this almost sound like a negative in a way, but one of the reasons he was so strong is he did not have an ego that most leaders have. And an example of that, Ronald Reagan got elected president, and the first thing he did was call the speaker, Tip O'Neill, who was a Democrat, and said, "Tip, what time can I come down and see you?" And Tip was all flustered, saying, "What do you mean you come to see me? We always come to your place. We come to the White House to honor you." And he goes, "No, I'm coming up." And that kind of broke the ice with Tip O'Neill. And the president walked in and said, "Tip, I hear you like to shoot pool." And the speaker's face lit up, and they would kid that during the day they would battle, but after 6 o'clock they were really good friends. And they used sort of an Irish heritage to even further that. The other thing I would say is Ronald Reagan had a tremendous knack for using humor to diffuse any situation. He collected cards on like certain jokes and one-liners and different things that he would use over the years to really break the ice and diffuse what could be an intense situation. The other thing he was famous for was not using the way we do today, polling data, to make his points. He would say, "This is what I stand for," and he would tell you exactly where he stood. So even if you opposed his ideas, you knew where he was, and you knew that he wasn't going to, maneuver around an issue just to make the polls look better. So he had a real sense of self. He had an appreciation for the place, a sense of place, if you will, with the Oval Office, as Carol was saying about Jim, but he also, when you talk to him in person, he was very soft-spoken. And then when he got on stage, he was able to really step up his communication skills and therefore called the great communicator. So I'll stop there and let the others chime in.
Well, I concur with everything that Michael said. He stole my sense of humor one, but that's okay. I can replace it because Ronald Reagan had a lot of other great qualities. And, one of them was optimism. And I'm not going to steal Tony's thunder because Tony has collected the president's jokes over the years. And I don't know if he's already told the joke about optimism, but I am going to leave that for him either in this session or in a later session. So I want all of you scholars to make sure that you press Tony on that because it is a great story. And it does give you a real true sense of Ronald Reagan's optimism. I think my second one really is he was very inspirational, and that goes along with his great communicator, but he was inspirational on a very personal level. He made it, for me, that was why he was a great communicator, because he would bring it down to the level of the people that he was speaking to. And you have to remember that Ronald Reagan did not grow up with money. He grew up in the Midwest. They were very poor in the time of when the people had no jobs. His dad, unfortunately, was an alcoholic, and he jumped from job to job to job. Ronald Reagan's mother is truly what gave him his sense of faith and strength, and he brought that sense of inspiration with him along into every profession that he had. As an actor, as a spokesperson for GE, as governor of the state of California, and certainly as president of the United States. And I'm going to add the last 10 years of his life. Although he did have Alzheimer's, I was very privileged to serve as his chief of staff and got to see him every day. And he carried that sense of inspiration and optimism with him truly until the day he died. And that for me really spoke volumes. And I think the last one that I want to tell you, and Michael really touched on this, he had a sense of others. It wasn't about him. It was about the other people in the room. And my second story with photos, if Tony has them up, is one I like to tell because for me, it was a very powerful couple of moments. But it spoke so much to who Ronald Reagan was as a leader and as a man. So you can see in the photographs here, this is the 1988 Seoul Olympics team from the summer of 1988. And one of the things that Ronald Reagan had started as president was he started inviting sports teams and groups that had won national champions. And of course, these are all our national champions to the White House. Well, as you can imagine, it took quite a bit of scheduling to actually make this happen because there's hundreds and hundreds of them. And we had worked for weeks to try and figure out how it would work. You can see them up on the stairs and up on the balcony. And we brought risers in. And of course, then it threatened to rain. And we had to have the president actually make the call that morning, whether we would go to the South Lawn, which is where we are here, or we would go to this other boring auditorium. And the president said, no, we wanted to do it here because he really wanted to stand in with those athletes and have them around him. That gave him actually, just a sense of energy and strength to do that. So we gathered them all up and we had the president come out and he spoke to them. Okay, you can move to the next photo. This is the team that had people like Matt Biondi, whom you can see here, Flojo, Florence Griffith Joyner, Janet Evans, if those names mean anything to all of you. They were household names for us. And so the president finished speaking and people, of course, all the athletes started yelling at him and wanting to talk to him and shake his hand. And he loved that. The president loved that. And you can see the president's face here is really pointed up towards your left. You can go on to the next photo. And so there was a young man in the crowd up there that was trying to speak to the president, and he kept trying to hand him something. Well, the president couldn't hear him. He had President wore hearing aids, and there were hundreds of athletes. And then people started getting shuffling and, it looked like they were getting pushed and that sort of thing. And that was the point where it was time for the president to go back. And so he said goodbye and he went back to the Oval Office. Well, I'm out on the South Lawn trying to usher the athletes out the South Lawn and down the driveway onto their buses, which were out on East Executive Avenue, which is a road that's closed now and it will probably never be open for security reasons again. I'm trying to usher these hundreds of athletes out the gate. And as I got to the actual guard shack that's on East Exec, the guard stepped out of his shack. He was a Secret Service agent, but he was uniformed. And he said, Ms. Hildebrand, that's my maiden name. And I said, yes. And he said, you're wanted. Mr. Kuhn called, you're wanted in the Oval Office. And I said, that's funny. That's a joke. And he said, no, ma'am. He said, I just got a call. And I said, that's not funny. Y'all have to understand, I had never been asked to come to the Oval Office ever, except with my office mates. We had blessed to have a photo. So I said, yeah, that's real funny. He said, no, ma'am, I'm not kidding. I said, okay, but if I come back here and that's not true, somebody's head is going to roll. So very quickly, I ran from East Executive Avenue over to the Oval Office, which is quite of a hike, breathing hard. I got into the outer office where Jim Kuhn was. And I said, did you really call me over here? And he said, yes, the boss has a question for you. And I said, uh-oh, am I in trouble? And he said, I don't know, but he has a question for you. So he ushered me into the Oval Office. I felt about this big. And I said, Mr. President, can I help you? And he said, yes. He said, I am concerned. He said, there was a young man when we were out there among all of those athletes. And he said, I could see that he was trying to hand me something. And I think he was pushed by one of our security agents. And I don't like that. So I am hoping that you can go find that young man and bring him here to the Oval Office so that I could talk to him. And of course, I looked him in the eye and I said, well, of course, sir. Yes, sir. I'll be right back. And I looked at Jim Kuhn and he looked at me and he's like, I don't know what to tell you. I can't help you, but good luck with that. Honestly, I didn't know what I was going to do. So I ran back across campus. Those of you who've been there know what I'm talking about. Down the colonnade, across the South Lawn, back to the gate. Now I'm going on to all of the buses one by one. And as I went on all of the buses and I explained there's a young man. And so I did this about 5 times. And on the 5th bus from the back, a guy yells, hey, I think that was Ray. And I said, Ray, are you on this bus? And literally from the back bench, this guy raises his hand, and as you can see, he's not a small man. And he said, yes, ma'am, that was me. And I said, oh, good. Well, you need to come with me. And he said, what for? And so I explained that the president wanted me to bring him to the Oval Office so that he could, explain what he wanted. And the guy looked at me and he said, no, ma'am, no, ma'am. And I said, oh, no, yes, you have to come with me. And he said, no, ma'am, I couldn't do that. And I said, no, but you could do that. And you have to come with me because honestly, I will lose my job. So he said, no, ma'am. He fought it the entire way. And he told me the story as we were hightailing it over there. And you can imagine he got there much faster than I did. I was still breathing hard. We got in there and Jim Coons said, oh, I'm so glad you found him. I don't know how you did that. But the boss was been waiting. He's been asking me every 5 minutes where you were. So I said, well, here, this is Ray Mercer. This is the gentleman that was trying to talk with the president. So Jim opened the door to the Oval Office and he let Ray Mercer in. And he said, you're coming, right? And I said, no. I was told to go get Ray Mercer. And he goes, oh, no, you're coming into the office with us. So we walked in there and the president stood up and he put out his hand and he said, well, hello. And Ray Mercer, as you can see him there, again, not a small man, practically melted into the Oval Office carpet. And he said, Mr. President, I'm so honored to meet you. And the president said, could you tell me what you wanted? He said, I couldn't hear you. And he said, and I'm not happy about the fact that one of my security agents pushed you. And Ray Mercer looked him in the eye and he said, oh, Mr. President, nobody pushed me. It was my fellow athletes. We were all pushing each other, trying to shake your hand and say hello to you. It was so exciting. We can't thank you enough for letting us come to the White House. And the president said, well, what is it you were trying to tell me? I could see you were trying to hand me something. And Ray Mercer looked him in the eye and he took the medal off from around his neck. And he said, Mr. President, I was trying to give you my gold medal. And the president said, what? Why would you do that? And Ray Mercer said, Mr. President, for what you've done for this country, you have earned a gold medal, and I wanted you to have mine. And the president looked him in the eye and he said, son, he said, I didn't earn that gold medal. You earned that gold medal, and you need to wear it around your neck. And he said, I'm so proud of you and all of your teammates. And Ray said to him, Mr. President, you've also earned a gold medal. He said, would you at least put it on so we could take a picture? So he took it off of his own neck and he put it on the president, around the president's neck. And there was a series of photos taken with Ray Mercer. Is that not the happiest man on the face of this earth right there? And then the president took it off of his neck and put it around Ray Mercer's neck again. I think he's the only member of the 1988 Seoul Olympics team to have the medal put around his neck by the president of the United States. It's a long story. I apologize for taking so much time, but it's a story that for me just shows the humility and the sense of others that Ronald Reagan had. That was how he operated on a daily level. That was not something that you just saw because the cameras were on. This was a private moment. The only reason that the pictures are being shown to you today is because I have access to the archives and I can pull them out. So anyway, that's for me is a really special story and one that I feel very privileged to have been able to witness inside the Oval Office. And now I'll stop talking.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, Ray Mercer, gold medalist in boxing. He was a boxer.
Right. Sorry to say. And he went on to an incredible professional career. I think he was held the heavyweight title for at least a year as a pro.
All right. And then let's see, we got a couple minutes left. I don't know. Josh, did you want to ask your last question? Oh, looks like Josh faded out. So we want to give some time to our scholars to ask questions. But before we do, just one last question to all three of our panelists. And we'll ask you to keep it relatively brief. But if President Reagan were here with us today, what do you think he might say to encourage our scholars? I'll start with Carol on this one.
Oh, wow. I think he'd tell them to study hard and be true to themselves and go through life with integrity. that's about it.
Excellent. Joanne or Michael, want to hop in on that?
Well, I can tell you, he would tell you to have a sense of humor about things. That was really important to him. It's how he got through his day. He collected jokes, and I think laughter was something that he felt was really important for him personally and professionally.
And I would echo what everybody said so far, but I think what I would say is that you would say to volunteer and get involved in your community, and that was a big thing that I promoted. And the advice I would give to the students is, my career was actually made by volunteering. I started out as an intern on Capitol Hill with Jack Kemp, and then when that was over, I went home to Buffalo, New York, where I'm originally from, and worked on his campaigns as a volunteer. And then a job opened up in the Washington office, and Jack called me up and said, "How would you like to come back?" And I was like, "Great." And then I was working with Congressman Kemp at the time. He went on to be later HUD Secretary. And we were at Reagan headquarters every day for the campaign. We would usually stop over there. Jack was a surrogate speaker. And then that led to me kind of getting discovered by the White House staff, and I started day one. But as I look back on it, it really came from volunteering and sort of helping out. And find something you're passionate about and volunteer.
Excellent. Wonderful advice.
Great advice. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have about 3 minutes left. So I wanted to encourage, if any of our scholars have a question, you can either request to come up on screen and ask it. You can type it in the chat, but we have a couple of minutes. So does anybody have any questions for our three panelists?
Don't tell me we have a shy group of scholars here.
I know they were selected because of their leadership and their willingness to take risks. Oh, it looks like we have one coming up here. I'm going to add Reagan here.
Hi. My
Love
name's
your
Reagan,
name,
I
Reagan.
guess. I guess my question, and I don't know if everyone can get answered or not, but what would you guys say was like the hardest parts to your jobs?
Well, for me, it was keeping myself alive. We worked incredible hours, and at least once a year, I would check myself into the George Washington Hospital, and they would pump like four bottles of fluid in me and tell me to stay the night because I was exhausted. We weren't as aware of health and way to take care of yourself better. So I wasn't very good at it, because every year I worked there, I think once a year I was just totally flat out. But
Honestly, I didn't know that's how you were handling it, but I would concur that, I had more all-nighters at the White House than I ever did as a college student. But I wouldn't have traded not even one moment of it. Looking back, there were some really rough days, but I think it's, as Michael said, you find something that you love. I didn't go looking for this either. Sometimes you just end up in the right place at the right time. And that's what, Michael's point about volunteering, go for it. And I would add to that, volunteer at a campaign, whatever campaign. It doesn't matter if it, who the person is or what, if it's a policy change, campaign work is something that everyone should do. It's extraordinary experience. And, but yeah, I think one of the hardest things was just staying awake and staying healthy.
And you have to remember that, I was just going to say real quick, we were all in our 20s when we were working there.
I mean, so young.
We were all really young. And, today, would I tell my children to go do this or in their 20s? I don't think so. I mean, it's just, you have to be unique to want to do this. And I, too, got it by accident, just being in the right place at the right time. But Carol, go ahead.
Oh, no. I volunteered in college on the campaign, and then continued to volunteer on presidential campaigns while I was in DC and, raising my kids. I worked at the Small Business Administration when I first got to Washington as a political appointee, but quickly stopped after I had kids. So then it was all volunteer, and I volunteered on both Bush campaigns. I volunteered on the McCain campaign, and then eventually was paid as the scheduler for Sarah Palin through that campaign. It just kind of gets in you, but it is, I mean, and I was much older when I was scheduling in a presidential campaign, and those were a lot of all-nighters. But it's great work. It gives you experience in so many different fields. I couldn't agree more.
And if I could just quote, really probably misquote a little bit, but not Ronald Reagan, but an earlier president, Thomas Jefferson. He had a very eloquent way of saying, the harder you work, the luckier you become. And you would hear all of us say we're really lucky to get our jobs, but there's a reason why that luck developed, because we were all very hardworking.
Excellent. Well, wonderful question.
So much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Reagan. A great question and some great advice to end this session on. I know we have another session coming up momentarily, a brain break session. So I want to take just a second. I want to thank Michael, Carol, and Joanne for sharing your stories with us, and for all the insights you shared with this group of scholars. So thank you very much for our scholars. I know that we're moving into the next session, which is going to be a 20-minute brain break, which is in the sessions, followed by session 3. Reminder, you'll also be off camera for that one as well. So once again, please join me in thanking Joanne, Carol, and Michael. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Reagan. Good luck to all of you scholars.
Glad to be with you. Bye-bye.